This video is sponsored by Surfshark. The Khitan Liao Dynasty was a very interesting moment in Chinese history. It is a time when China had two recognized emperors, one in the ethnic Han-ruled Song Dynasty and the other in the Khitan-ruled Liao Dynasty. And that just goes completely against the idea of there should be only one son of heaven, the holder of the mandate of heaven. So how did this happen, and who were the Khitans? You will find out after the intro. Who were the Khitans? The Khitans are often called para-Mongolic, but that's just because of the similarity of their language to the Mongolian language. The identity of the steppe tribes is actually much more complicated than that. The Khitan Liao Dynasty was established by Abaoji, who became the great Khan of the Khitans in 907 and announced himself as the emperor in the Chinese style in 916. In the process, he conquered a lot of the other steppe people, including some Han Chinese. So other tribes, such as the Jurchens, who will later establish the Jurchen Qin Dynasty, and the Siwei, which had Mongols under them, were all part of the larger Khitan Empire. The Khitans had actually existed much longer before the 10th century, but it was only during Abaoji's time that they had a lucky break and rose to the top. Previously, during the Tang Dynasty, they were under the Turks and switched allegiances between various powers such as the Tang Dynasty and even the Uyghurs. In terms of lineage, they split away from the Xianbei, who split from the Donghu themselves when they were defeated by the Xiongnu Emperor, Modu Sanyu, in the 3rd century BCE. So you can equally say that the Mongols were para-Khitanic, just as the Khitans were para-Mongolic. It is just that the Mongols happen to be a lot more famous, and their culture survived until today, while the Khitans have assimilated into various cultures and disappeared. Check out my previous interview with Professor Hyunjin Kim after this video if you want to know more about the inner workings of the steppe culture. So how and why in the world did these steppe people turn their Khanate into a Chinese empire? Did they suddenly just decide this out of the blue? Not really. There is actually a political reason for that. And to be fair, there is also narrative dissonance between the Chinese official history and the cultural narrative. In poems, folklores, and classic literature such as Water Margin, the Khitan Liao Dynasty were treated as invaders and the barbaric others. But historically, and in the official 24 dynastic histories of China, the Khitan Liao Dynasty is considered to be a legitimate Chinese dynasty. Even in Russia, they still call China by its exonym, Khitai. The reason for this cognitive dissonance is actually quite funny. That's because after Kublai Khan conquered China and established the Yuan dynasty, Mongol historians considered the Han-led Song, Khitan-led Liao, and the Jurchen-led Qin Dynasty to be all legitimate, and Kublai Khan inherited the mandate of heaven from them. Think about it. If they say that the Khitans and Jurchens can't create a legitimate Chinese dynasty, then how about Mongols like them? So this historical narrative is passed on to the Ming dynasty and later dynasties as they inherit the mandate of heaven in succession. So here we can see that by just looking at the difference between the historical and cultural narrative of a country, we can gain an extra dimension of insight into history. And if we were to look at history from the opposing side, we can obviously learn much more. On the internet, history is often told from the Western perspective, especially colonial history. Even if there are media from the opposing side, it is often region-locked, quite literally. Like this Indonesian film Sultan Agung, which ironically is only available in Thailand and a few other Southeast Asian countries. But luckily, I've got Surfshark, the VPN service which allows me to change my region and watch this movie as if I'm from the region it serves. This movie depicts the colonization of Indonesia by the VOC, or the Dutch East Indies Company. It's got action, awesome historical set pieces, but most importantly, it is told from the perspective of the native defenders, something that you can't easily get in mainstream media. Besides allowing you to access rare piece of media, Surfshark also provides you with added security, as it masks your IP address, keeping you safe on the internet. So what are you waiting for? Use the link in the description and enter my code BROS. to get 83% off your subscription and 3 extra months for free. Alright, back to the Khitans. Well, if we want to pinpoint a principal cause for the reason why the Khitans want to create a Chinese-style empire, we can perhaps point this to Abaoji's friendship with Li Keyong, an ethnic Sato-Turk warlord who operated during the chaotic period near the fall of the once great Tang Dynasty. The two became sworn brothers in 905 when Abaoji brought 70,000 cavalry riders to assist the latter. The Tang Dynasty was being slowly usurped by Li Keyong's biggest rival, Zhu Wen, who would establish the later Liang Dynasty. Zhu Wen was a major douchebag who tried to assassinate him before, so obviously he can't suffer him becoming the Emperor of China. So Li Keyong did everything he could to wrestle the throne away from him. He did not succeed in his lifetime, but his son will finish his job and establish the later Tang Dynasty. 4 of the 5 dynasties of the 5 dynasties and 10 kingdoms period were all established by Li Keyong's son and the generals who served their family. Despite his lack of achievements, all the major dynasties turned out to be connected to this one seemingly insignificant guy. The Khitans, through their Khan, Abaoji, can also technically be considered his relative, and they became the major power broker during this chaotic period, sometimes assisting them and other times impeding them, because they had their own interests to fulfill, of course. By the way, you can find out more about the 5 dynasties and 10 kingdoms periods from our previous episode. This time, we're going to focus on the Khitan's perspective. Around the time Abaoji swore his brotherhood with Li Keyong, the Khitan chief confided in his new brother that he was going to be replaced after 3 years, as according to his people's custom. Then Li Keyong just gave him a very simple advice. Who cares about them? Just ignore them. Li Keyong himself was a military governor of the Tang Dynasty, a Jiedusi, but he just ignored all the orders from the top and ruled as a warlord. So Abaoji took this advice, and in a couple of years, he strong-armed his way into becoming the great Khan of the Khitans in 907. Coincidentally, the Tang Dynasty also fell on the same year, and the later Liang Dynasty was established, kicking off the chaotic 5 dynasties and 10 kingdoms period. Obviously, Abaoji wasn't very popular, and he spent the next few years conquering more tribes while eliminating internal oppositions, until finally, in 916, he declared a Chinese-era name and appointed his wife Su Luping as his empress and his eldest son Ye Lu Bei as his successor. Traditional Chinese historians usually consider this to be the true start of the Liao Dynasty. This went completely against Khitan customs, where succession was supposed to be decided through tribal gathering and elections. But here we can see that Abaoji is adopting Chinese political custom just to keep the power within his family. He even offered sacrifice to Confucius first before Buddha, because his son pointed out that Buddha was not a Chinese god. However, Abaoji didn't completely abandon his Khitan heritage and just became Chinese. Like the steppe people that came before and after him, he cherry-picked only the stuff that he liked. For example, Abaoji ordered the creation of the Khitan script. While the shapes are based on the Chinese character strokes, it is actually a whole different system used for the Khitan language, the official language. They still use their traditional law to rule their northern nomadic population, but they ruled their southern sedentary Chinese population according to Chinese laws. So they were being really practical in the application. The Khitan Empire then continued to expand under Abaoji. He raided Li Cunxu, Li Keyong's son territory at times, but he remained relatively friendly to the Li family, who eventually defeated their nemesis, later Liang, and established the later Tang Dynasty in 923. At the time, the Khitans had plenty of space to expand and haven't seriously tried to conquer China yet. They proceeded to conquer Balhae in 926, which angered the newly established Goryeo Dynasty of Korea. Goryeo and Balhae were linked through the kingdom of Goguryeo, the kingdom from which many of their people were descended from. And with Balhae no longer acting as a buffer state between them, the conflict between Goryeo and Khitans will be fought until the next century. Soon after the conquest of Balhae, Abaoji died to illness. As for his successor, he wasn't succeeded by his son, Ye Liu Bei. Surprisingly, it was his younger son, Ye Liu Deguang, who succeeded him. The Khitan elites just considered Ye Liu Bei to be too bookish and too much of a Sinophile to succeed the throne. So Empress Su Luping made her second son the new emperor. And nobody could defy Su Luping, who was quite the character herself. She was a literal warrior princess. Warrior empress, sorry, who personally fought in the battlefield, and she was also one of the empire's best strategists. She was so tough, she won't even bow to her mother-in-law, the Empress Dowager. She claimed that she will only bow to heaven and not to people. Usually, when an emperor dies, his consorts and concubines would be killed and buried along with him. But she knew that she had a lot more to do in life and couldn't die yet. So, to silence her detractors, she cut out her hand and buried it in her husband's grave. The rest of her will follow later. The pastoralist Khitan women in general had more autonomy than the sedentary people surrounding them. They often hunt and fought together with their men. But this treatment may not be extended to the women of other tribes, because Khitan envoys often demanded to sleep with the women of other tribes. In turn, this custom will be the cause of their downfall. We will get back to this later. The second Khitan emperor, Ye Liu Deguang, was uneasy about the prospect of his brother, Ye Liu Bei, rebelling. The latter was given his own little kingdom in where Balhae was located. So Ye Liu Deguang transferred the people from his brother's kingdom away and kept a close watch on him. Fed up with the constant pressure, Ye Liu Bei eventually defected to later Tang, where he was given a high position since they had sworn familial connection. Ye Liu Bei adopted the Chinese name Li Zanhua. This defection is a major threat for Ye Liu Deguang. Since his mom couldn't bear to eliminate his brother, he had to do it one way or another. And this opportunity eventually presented itself. Si Jingtang, one of later Tang's military governors, rebelled, and the Khitans decided to back him against the later Tang dynasty. But this support didn't come cheap. To secure the Khitans' help, Si Jingtang had to first throw away his dignity by addressing Ye Liu Deguang as Father Emperor, even though he was older than the Khitan Emperor by 10 years. Then he also gave away the strategic 16 prefectures of northern China, which included the site that would become the city of Beijing today. The rebellion succeeded, and Si Jingtang established the later Qin Dynasty. Conveniently, Ye Liu Bei was killed by a later Tang officer when he refused to commit mass suicide with the rest of the later Tang royal family. Now, with the possession of the 16 prefectures and an emperor of China calling him father, the Khitans had increasingly more stakes and justification in conquering China. After the death of Si Jingtang, his successor and ministers all think that it was quite disgraceful for them to address the Khitan emperor as Father Emperor. So in a sort of a sneaky way, the later Qin Dynasty Emperor tried to get away by just calling him Grandfather instead of Father Emperor, because it has less political symbolism. But nah, Ye Liu Deguang is having none of it. He punished this insubordination by invading them. Due to the long period of political upheavals in China, there were a lot of people captured to Khitan, and many became refugees. Some Chinese officials were also recruited by the Khitans, and they helped the Khitan emperors implementing the Imperial Chinese political system into their empire. So when Ye Liu Deguang conquered the capital, he proclaimed himself as the Emperor of China. Previously, in 936, he had renamed the Khitan Empire Liao, and now, in 947, he is calling it Great Liao, because he had just conquered China, albeit just a small part at the time. But still, events like this will be used to reinforce their claim for China. During his occupation, however, Ye Liu Deguang made a grave mistake of robbing the wealth of the population. This caused great resentment, and resistance forces sprung up everywhere. This, in combination with the unbearable summer heat, which was too much for the cold-loving Khitans to handle, forced him to return north. Sadly for him, he died to illness along the way before making it back to his homeland. The following succession crisis and instability that ensued tied up the Khitans' hands and prevented them from launching a serious effort at reconquering China for a long time. Meanwhile, down in China, Capitalizing on the power vacuum, a military governor, Liao Dynasty, quickly seized power and established the later Han Dynasty. But his dynasty only lasted 4 years, and he only reigned for one of those years. His young successor was deposed in a coup, and the later Zhou, the last of the 5th dynasty, was established. One of the royal family members of the later Han then aligned themselves to be a vassal state of the Khitans, and established the kingdom of Northern Han. This is realpolitik, guys. Sometimes your greatest enemy can become an ally at the drop of a hat. You know, as they say, in international relations, there are no permanent friends or permanent enemies, only permanent interests. The rivalry between the Chinese dynasties and the Khitan Liao would last all the way until the end of the Liao Dynasty. During the early part of the dynasty, the Khitans had the upper hand. But once the Song dynasty usurped the later Zhou and unified most of China, the balance started to shift. Once the Song dynasty conquered the Khitan vassal states of Northern Han, they proceeded to march north against Liao itself. Luckily for the Khitans, the Song campaign was defeated, and on their second campaign, the famous Song general Yang Ye was even killed in action. This became the premise of the Yang's family general folktale, where the womenfolk of the Yang family rode to the battlefield to get the boys home. By coincidence, the late 10th century somehow became a stage for a few strong women in the region. Liao Dynasty was virtually ruled by Empress Xiao Yan. She was the regent of her young son, so she was pretty much calling all the shots. She was not a fighter like her predecessor Su Luping, but she was brave enough to personally lead in the battlefield. Around the same period, Queen Mother Chun Chu also became the regent of her young son in Goryeo, Korea. The wars between Goryeo and the Khitans were quite epic, and it was an important series of battles in the Korean national memory. The balance of power between the Khitans and their neighboring countries fluctuated over time. While they never made any great progress, they were able to exact tribute from both Goryeo and Song and maintained the dual emperor status with the latter. Their run, however, came to an end in the early 12th century because, as we have talked about earlier, the Khitan envoys demanded to be served by the women of other tribes. The Jurchens didn't object too much until the Khitans started demanding for the Jurchen noble women to serve them. After suffering this and many other humiliations, the Jurchens, led by Wanyan Aguta, finally rebelled against the Khitans and formed the Qin Dynasty in 1115. Capitalizing on this split, the Song dynasty quickly formed an alliance with the Jurchens and launched a two-pronged attack against the Khitans. Finally, in 1125, the Liao dynasty was defeated, and the Khitan tribes came under the control of the Jurchen Qin Dynasty. But the Khitan Empire wasn't completely destroyed, because a Khitan noble, Ye Lü Dasi, led a segment of the Khitan society and moved west to form the Karakitai, also known as Western Liao. But that's a story for another time. On the next episode, we will look at the Jurchen Qin Dynasty in greater detail. Remember to subscribe so that you won't miss the episode. Before I go, I would like to thank all our patrons on Patreon for supporting the channel, and all you viewers for liking and sharing this video. By the way, remember to check the link to Surfshark. Until next time, stay cool, my bros!